Chuck, your thing is you look at damage. Walk us through the damage overall we'll see from Hurricane Florence and individually by state.
Right. It's kind of tough to get estimates, and that's why we use a lot of computer modeling and satellite reports at this stage. Florence was another one of these strange hurricanes we've had the last couple of years that if it had just been your traditional storm that came in, hit land, and moved on, it probably would have been about a $12 billion event, $7 billion from wind, wave, coastal surge, and then maybe an additional $5 billion or so inland. Well, the problem is, of course, the stall and the extra rain. And of course, we're still in the middle of this disaster. It's not going to start to dry out for a couple of days, and some of the rivers and streams may take a week to crest. So we're still in the middle of the actual event. But our current estimates are that's going to add about $10 billion to this event. So it's going to be really close to breaking the top 10 damage storms in U.S. history.
So, Chuck, give us a sense. As you say, we haven't had the cresting yet, won't for a few days now. Does your $10 billion extra in flood, does that take into account what you think is the reasonable case of the worst case now here? What's the over and under on this?
Right. Yeah, that's we play out and let the water run off. The computer models simulate the hydrology and try to figure out what the end result's going to be when we look back on this. In fact, our models try to look back on it after a year. So you mentioning economics earlier, and you've got, say, a casino that shuts down, looking at Macau, which is another simulation set that we've done. That's a short-term hit. They're going to gain some of those revenues back because people will come back in and they'll spend a little bit more. So over the course of time, a lot of these losses you'll recover. So it's a little bit tricky when you look at short-term versus, say, looking back on it a year later. You mentioned GDP hits, things like that. So just for comparison, we're thinking that that Mangkhut is going to be about a $32 billion hit for the Chinese economy long-term, $18 billion of that in Hong Kong alone. So you look at the Philippines, and again, China's economy is so huge. That's like you think even a $20 billion here in the U.S., it's tragic for the people that are hit, but it's not a huge thing. Let's compare that to Philippines, where we're estimating about $17 billion if you use purchasing power parity. Well, that's 6.5% of their overall GDP. We're looking at 8% of their agriculture on the northern islands, which is so critical to the Philippine economy. They've lost 80% of their harvest for this year. So as you were talking about earlier, I'm pleased to hear you guys discuss that, because these hits on emerging economies are so different from a developed economy like the U.S. or even a mixed economy like China.